All right, so let's kick things off. Thanks for coming to today's session on modern spirituality. I'm very excited about the content that we have today. And I really want to start off with a couple of questions, right? And we're going to be sharing part of our personal stories in this session. And some of the questions that I really want us to be asking and exploring today is there something more out there into the world than what we can perceive with our senses? And if that's the case, then how do we know? My background, which I'll get a little bit more into, is that I studied deterministic math science. I was rigorously logical and scientific. And so how did basically I start changing some of my views? How were we opened up to different worldviews? So the three panelists that we have today, they come from a variety of spiritual paths. In other words, we actually disagree with each other. And our goal today is basically to provide value to you, right? So addressing the elephant in the room up front, we are going to be talking about religion today. And the reason why we're doing so is because this is something that's important for us that we're just trying to share. We do so out of a goal of basically just providing value for you. Our ask is that you please respect our beliefs as we respect yours. No one here is telling you that you have to believe anything. We are just trying to talk about new ideas. So a little bit about what we'll be exploring today. One thing is, what is spirituality, right? So this is a term that has changed a lot throughout time. What does spirituality even mean? We'll talk about that. Finally, we'll agree on definitions. We'll basically then start exploring a little bit more about how can we know, right? How can we know if there are some other things out there? What's the proof? Finally, we'll turn it over to our panelists and we'll finish out with the time of receiving. And so a little bit about my backstory. I grew up atheist. I really hated religion, didn't really know why. I alluded to this earlier, but I studied deterministic math science. And so what I mean by this is that I believe that we were a bunch of atoms. I believe the entire universe was a bunch of well-ordered equations. And I basically believe that any sort of thing outside of this worldview was a bunch of nonsense, right? So I was very, very, very rigorously atheist. And when I was in college, I started exploring. One of my best friends was president of Hindu Student Council, and he started taking me into different paths, events, and I started exploring myself. So I went to many different religious paths, meetings, and I started exploring on my own. Sometimes it felt like an exciting new world where I was opening up my mind. And sometimes it felt like a big maze. So it was confusing, didn't really understand why there were so many different spiritual paths, didn't really understand why they disagreed. And what I learned after exploring for about 1.5 to 2 years was that there were actually a lot of similarities between many of the spiritual paths that I explored. And so some of the common threads that I found is that people groups throughout time, throughout geography, cross-culturally, they actually independently came to the same conclusions a lot of the time. So what I mean by this is there might be some tribe in North America with actually very similar concepts and beliefs to some tribe in a Pacific Island country. And so some of the things that I saw in common were, one, the existence of there being some form of non-physical world. So we'll call it a spiritual world. And also that we're not just a bunch of atoms, right? That we are actually spiritual beings. After our body dies, then there's some part of us which is a spiritual form that will eventually leave our body. Most of these spiritual paths also talked about life after death, that there is some form of afterlife. And finally, that we are involved in some form of cosmic battle. So what I mean by this is good versus evil, and this battle involves many different deities. So the big question that I had is, why are different people throughout time, cross geography, cross culture, all coming to similar conclusions about the state of the universe? Is it that it's just chance, or are they actually just observing the same thing and calling it with different terms? So that's one of the big questions that I had. Talking about the term spirituality, it's evolved many different times. And one of the things that I want to just talk about is to sort of simplify. Let's just talk about these 5 things today. So are there spiritual worlds out there? is there something more than what we can observe with our senses? Do we have some sort of spiritual component? Is there something like life after death? And are we caught up in some greater narrative? So the first thing that I want to talk about is non-physical worlds. I first started exploring non-physical worlds unintentionally. And as a sophomore in college, I started getting this thing called sleep paralysis. What sleep paralysis is it's basically, for me, it was times in which I would wake up and I couldn't move. And oftentimes I would feel terrified, right? So I'd wake up in a cold sweat. And one of the things that I observed about this is that I usually got it when I was in a negative emotional state. So if I was discouraged or I was tired or in a bad mood, then I was more likely to get this. The other observation that I had with sleep paralysis was that I was very distinctly remember feeling that there was some other entity that was responsible for this. So it wasn't just chance. I felt like there was something that was doing this to me. And so as a 20-year-old in college, I started exploring it. And I realized that around half of people experience this, around 5 people experience it regularly. The more interesting thing to me was that I found out that people often see dark figures associated with this. And so what I mean by this is cross geography, cross culturally, and throughout history, people independently from each other have observed this phenomena and dark figures creating it, right? They also often talk about how it's universally terrifying for people. This is so common cross-culturally that you can actually see it in a bunch of artwork. So this is an example of a painting by a Swiss artist. In the year 1781, Henry Fuseli, he painted this, and this is commonly thought of as sleep paralysis. So over here, the woman is sleeping. There's some sort of evil spirit or demonic figure that's sitting on her chest, and she doesn't look like she's having a good time, right? So literally, this is seen in our artwork. I started exploring the scientific reasons for why this was the case, and I wasn't satisfied. The scientists themselves, they'll admit that it's not well understood. There's many different leading theories as to why this happens. But I started thinking to myself as a 20-year-old whether or not this is reasonable. So what I mean by this is, why is it intrinsic to overlapping sleep cycles, our REM sleep cycles overlapping with the waking sleep cycle? Why does that intrinsically create this universally experienced experience of seeing dark figures and this almost tormenting feeling, right? It just didn't make sense to me. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is I realized that sometimes when I would go inside buildings that I would almost feel the emotions behind these buildings. And so what I mean by this is I regularly actually like libraries. But over here, this picture on the bottom right, it's an example of one library that I just felt absolutely disgusting going into. So I could be having a great day, wonderful fall day. And as soon as I set foot inside this building, I would feel absolutely just like full of anxiety and depression. And I later realized that I was just picking up on the latent emotions that were inside of this building. This is a building on campus that was full of stress. I was just feeling that. So the big question for me was, I'm not observing people's facial expressions. People aren't interacting with me. Literally me walking into this building, I can feel something. So that doesn't seem to be something that's like physical. There seems to be something more that's happening to this. Number 2, spiritual beings and physical bodies. This is the third thing that I started exploring. And I started reading about these things called near-death encounters. And what I realized after doing a lot of research is that people throughout time, cross-culture, cross-geography, they all have this concept of the afterlife, right? And so what I mean by this is Plato's The Republic, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the other thing that was more interesting to me was that I realized that there's actually rigorously academic and scientific institutions that study near-death encounters. So the University of Virginia in North America, they have a division of perpetual studies. And this literally, what they do all day is they basically study things like near-death encounters. One of the things that I found that was remarkable was that there was actually remarkable similarities in many of the surveyed near-death encounters. So in other words, as consciousness and your body starts to die down as you get closer to death, people actually saw very similar experiences. The study of near-death encounters in the United States started when a man named George Ritchie, in December of 1943, as a 20-year-old Army private, he actually died. And so I used to work in EMS, and how you actually define death is when your vital signs stop. So he wasn't breathing and he had 0 heartbeat and all of his vital signs were completely flatlined. He was in that state for 9 minutes, and the medical examiners at the time actually sent him to the morgue. So he literally was completely just out of it, right? In this encounter, when he was in these 9 minutes, what ended up happening is George Ritchie claimed to have had a visionary experience where he met Jesus Christ and traveled with him through time and space. So he actually woke up from this 9 minutes later and lived to tell the tale. So the story is that after George Ritchie woke up from this, his life was radically changed. He became a Christian. And then the other thing is that he ended up serving youth for almost 20 years. So completely changed his life trajectory. There are what I believe genuine near-death encounters, and there are also fake near-death encounters. One of the marks, in my opinion, of a genuine near-death encounter is how it impacts people's lives afterwards. The only other thing that I would say about this is this started off an entire industry, right? So George shared his story with some of the researchers at the University of Virginia. And then the University of Virginia, they created a department in which they interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people around the entire planet. So whenever they had a near-death encounter, you could go talk to UVA, and then they basically did an analysis of this. What Virginia found is that there are actually common experiences in near-death encounters. And so first, there's often this idea of your spirit form actually leaving your body. So people actually see themselves drift out of their physical body. Oftentimes, then this spirit form starts floating through some sort of darkness before eventually becoming aware of some golden light. After they do this, then these people end up encountering a being of light. And so what I mean by this is Christians often interpret that being as Jesus or God, and people of other faiths, they interpret it as their own deity. So people of the Islamic faith, they interpret it as Allah, for instance. There are alternative experiences that the University of Virginia has found too. And if this is something that interests you, then I recommend checking out Altered States by UVA Magazine. So you can go find that article using Google. One of the things I'd like to also talk about is cosmic battle and gods, right? So throughout time, cross culture, geography, one of the things that I observed is many of these faith paths, there were some generalities. So there was the idea that there were good and bad spirits, that there were extremely powerful spirits that they call God or gods, and that there was some sort of large cosmic battle with human beings often stuck in the middle. Where these religious paths differed, in my experience, was the name of these god and gods, also the reason behind the cosmic battle and the creation narrative and the nature of afterlife. So those were things that people disagreed on. Things that the different paths agreed on was the idea that there was a spirit world, that there was an afterlife, and that we were part of some sort of larger narrative. And so one of the big things that I want to leave with us about this is posing the question of why is it that people throughout time, cross geography, cross culturally, have all come to similar conclusions? Conclusions that we're not just a bunch of mass energy, that there is some sort of greater narrative in our life. We might have disagreeing versions of what that narrative is, but everyone agrees, for the most part historically, that there is some sort of greater narrative. So I just leave that question for you. You're probably tired of hearing from me, so let's hear from the panelists. First, we'll have Mike LeBeau.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Okay. Let's see here. All right. My name is Mike LeBeau, Technology Partner Manager on the Alliances team with GitLab. I'm grateful to be here today presenting to all of you. And when Chris reached out to me about a week and a half ago and said, "Hey, would you like to be a panelist on this modern spirituality panel?" I thought to myself, and then I said to Chris, I don't really think that I'm qualified to be on this panel. And then reflected a little bit more on it. And, I guess I do have, because I said, I don't necessarily feel that I'm more spiritual than the next person, but I do have an interesting path that I've taken, and I'd like to share that with all of you and hope that it resonates. So today we're just going to kind of look at my life, look at my path, and where I am today. Starting with a look back of me in my 20s when I was all yang, no yin, to my eventual discovery of yoga and how it prepared me for an earth-shattering event in my life. Also with me following my passion to launch a startup that connected people around their passions for nature and pulling the ripcord on my corporate job that I had at the time, and then developing a more genuine, authentic relationship with nature. So this is me in my 20s, and the first picture kind of sums it up with me wearing a suit and tie, riding a fixed gear bicycle, popping a wheelie. I mean, that was kind of me, burning the candle at both ends, happy hours during the week and on the weekends, raging life, loading up the Jeep with bikes and beers and going out into the wilderness and having a blast with my friends, skiing, rock climbing, really anything that kind of brought me into that present moment and made me feel alive is what I was seeking for. But I was lacking balance and grounding and foundation and connection to something higher. Again, all yang and no yin. So all of that external output was depleting and something had to give. My life changed when I stepped onto my first yoga mat. And I'm not going to sit here and say, the first time I went to yoga, I was all ohmed out and was enlightened, still not enlightened. But, and I started with hot yoga, and initially I was attracted to it for the physical aspects of it. I loved the sweat. It reminded me, it was the closest thing I had from a high school wrestling workout. And so loved that physical aspect, but then starting to go, first it was like once a year, then it was a couple times a year. And so it was a slow process, but the more frequently I began to go, I started to develop a deeper love for the practice. And I remember one time in particular, I recollect after a very stressful day at the office, I came home, and normally I would have called up a buddy, gone to a local bar and drowned my woes with some beers. But I made a conscious decision, I'm going to go to yoga. I'm going to go to hot yoga and see how I feel afterwards. And I can vividly recall after that 1 hour yoga session on my mat that my body was calm. My mind was calm. I literally couldn't even recall what it was that had me so stressed out from the day before. And I knew at that moment, like, this is powerful. And I need to lean into this because it's making me a better human being. And that began my pursuit and eventual completion of a 200-hour RYT yoga certification. I was taking classes at night so I could continue my day job. And I'm incredibly grateful for the transformative journey and the heart opening that yoga enabled. And it provided a stable foundation for the earth-shattering news that was to come. Shortly after that process, I had a dream that was so vivid it woke me up in tears and in sweat. And sadly, a week later, I received confirmation when my sister called me and told me that she was recently diagnosed with stage 4 thyroid cancer and was given 6 months to live. And, you start looking at your life and your actions differently when someone close to you is potentially going to be leaving this earth soon, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So I was going through this spiritual transformation, and I'm grateful that I had yoga and I had the nature as positive outlets to get me through that time. But I was also, at the same time, I wasn't feeling fulfilled in my career. And I had this burning desire inside of me, this burning passion to launch a startup that connected people around their passions for the outdoors, for nature, something that had helped me so much. And quick side note, my sister is a badass and a fighter, and she fought hard for 5 more years. So she was around for much longer, and we had amazing experiences together that I will cherish forever. And so, and she was instrumental and suggested that I do follow my passions. So cut the ripcord. Along with some buddies, we started a startup. It was called Rage Life. Don't just live life, rage life. Every breath, every moment, live it to the fullest. Follow your passions. And we connected people around their passions for the outdoors. We were solving the challenge of finding people to adventure with around you, connect online to go offline. I explained it as it's like Tinder for adventure, but instead of connecting people around their body parts, we connect them around their passions. And that always got a good laugh. So as you can imagine, entrepreneurship has its highs and its lows. And, it was amazing to have all these great adventures and experiences. But at the same time, it was very challenging. And, at this point in my journey, my sister had recently passed away. So I asked Spirit for guidance, and it led me to South America on a backpacking adventure, again, to reconnect with nature. And so nature is healer. During my travels, I connected with a spiritual community from Colombia that have held on to their ancestral wisdom for living in harmony with the earth. Respect for the earth and our natural resources. I couldn't believe just the deep and profound and authentic, genuine connection that they had with nature and with Mother Earth. They view our natural resources not as our government, but as our leaders, just like our grandmothers and our grandfathers. They deserve our respect: the sun, the water, the air, the land, the plants, and the animals. It helped me. I had to reevaluate my mission with my company, with my startup, and it led to a rebranding to Tribe Outdoors in a more refined mission of connecting people with nature, the present moment, and with each other by enabling them to share meaningful experiences together offline. I realized that the root reason for wanting to connect people was because I knew that once they developed a passion for the outdoors, whether that was skiing, hiking, mountain biking, they would inherently develop a greater respect for nature and for our earth. And those lessons have carried with me on all my adventures since then, and as well as into my daily life. I try to live with intention and gratitude each and every day, grateful for the sun, for the water, for all that Mother Earth provides. This pic is from the summit of Mount Rainier. I have so much respect and admiration for that mountain. My views have changed in that I no longer look at nature as something to be conquered, like I dominated that mountain, but instead as a teacher from whom we can learn valuable lessons in life. When we look at nature as something to be controlled or owned or dominated, that's what leads us to the environmental dilemma that we have today. But when we treat nature with respect and gratitude for its beauty and the challenges that it presents us and that force us to go deeper into ourselves, I mean, there's nothing like traveling across a glacier to remind us of how infinitely small we are in the grand scheme of this world and this universe. And I have countless experiences of just being put into precarious situations in the outdoors, and really being forced to go within, to find what you're made of, to discover your internal will and your ambition to press on. And maybe you reach that summit or your goal, or maybe you don't, but just the process and the journey along the way, you're going to grow, you're going to build character. So I have so much respect for nature and its ability to teach. And with that, I just wanted to say the most daring adventure is the journey within. And I hope that by sharing my journey, it may help you along your own path. Thank you. And I will hand it off to, let's see.
Yeah, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah. There we go.
All right, Kalyan, ready to you. I think you're muted.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great story. Hello, everyone. My name is Kalyan, and I'm going to talk about my story. So I just got a bit of hiccup in terms of not seeing something which I wanted to.
Do you want me to share slides for you?
No, it's fine right now. Yeah, thank you. So I'll deep dive into my story. So during the pandemic, many industries were affected, including business travel, which I was part of. I could see industry as a whole halting due to reasons we all know about, and could see the consequences after that. COVID stats around the world, too much negative news. Knowing your industry getting affected at that point of time wasn't good for my mental health. And I'm sure many would have experienced similar situations. During this time, meditation and spirituality came to my rescue, which I'm going to talk about. My story is essentially how I regained spiritual inclination via meditation and spiritual learning during the pandemic, which brought me more inner peace, calm, and mental clarity. Born and raised in India in a traditional Hindu family, I always had religious and spiritual aspects since early days. I had done yoga but never could make it as a regular practice, and meditation wasn't something I had considered at that time. I became aware about Vipassana meditation through few close family members few years ago. Vipassana, which means to see things as they really are, is one of the India's most ancient techniques of meditation. It was taught in India more than 2,500 years ago as a universal remedy for universal ills. Vipassana is an Asian mindfulness meditation technique. It involves observing your thoughts and emotions as they are without judging or dwelling on them, and mainly involves anapana, which means mindfulness of breathing. Pandemic gave me that opportunity to learn about it and practice it. Traditionally, it's taught as redi- uh, residential courses. I'm sorry. However, I was able to find an online group sitting version. My experience was great. It helped me making my thoughts peaceful. Along with Vipassana, I also started spiritual learning through an organization called Brahma Kumaris Online. This encouraged a deeper understanding of individuals' place and purpose within the broader context of life. And my spiritual take after doing all this is that life looked different when viewed from a spiritual perspective. With spiritual awareness, one could recognize alternatives to negative patterns and learn to understand and apply them. Spiritual perspective transfer one's inner state from fear to dignity, from anxiety to courage, from sorrow to fulfillment, and from anger to peace. As a born Hindu, temple has always been a center to my life. Before pandemic, it was easier to visit. However, having a shrine at home really helped during the difficult times. Hinduism allocates a god to every object and therefore speaks of millions of gods. The concept behind that is to point out that God is everything, every being. Temples are found where electric waves move between the north and south poles are strong. Doing worship, chanting, meditation amplifies this positive energy and can be absorbed by attendees to the space. This leaves feeling of upliftment and positivity. In Hindu spirituality, God has reassured man will not be alone. Every time dharma, which is the righteous way of life, not to be mixed up with religion, he shall be there. In conclusion, meditation and spirituality gave me that balance and soul consciousness that I was always looking for, making me feel lighter, calmer, considerate, and grateful for everything in life. Thank you. That's my story and my time. Passing over to Chris.
Thanks, Kalyan. So, yeah, hard act to follow, Kalyan. Thank you for that. So, I want to share a little bit about my story. We talked about how I grew up atheist. Part part of what ended up happening with me is that after a long period of searching, I ended up finding Jesus in a church in Ireland. And so this was something that was really not expected for me. What ended up happening in my life is that after a long period of searching, I ended up walking into a church through a personal invitation. And then within 30 seconds, I just knew that I wanted to become Christian. And I had almost like a completely overwhelming emotional reaction to the service. And so, to be fully transparent, Christianity to me was theoretical and impersonal at first. A lot of rules, things that I didn't fully understand. But for a really long time, I knew that there was this concept in Christianity of God as a loving father. And that's something that I really, really, really wanted to experience. And so for hundreds and hundreds of times, I would just pray, God, I want to know you as a father, right? This isn't something that I had a super great experience with growing up, but I really contended for this. This is something that I spent years for praying. What ended up happening in my life is that when I was in my mid-20s, I ended up falling asleep in the middle of a church service. And I had this lucid dream in which I interacted with God as a father. And so one of the things that I didn't experience when I was a child growing up was I always wanted to have someone, a father in my life that would teach me how to do like plumbing and electricity and stuff like that. That's something that I really wanted. And in this visionary dream that I actually believed happened, I just saw God, the Father, and then he was taking me and teaching me how, as a child, how to do some of these things. So it was actually, the dream was basically, we were in the back of a farmhouse and it was a tool bench and we were just making furniture together. So it was very, very personally profound for me. Ever since then, it answered a lot of the deep questions and the doubts that I had. And Christianity to me is a religion of action. What I want to do every day is I want to love God because he first loved me. I want to love others, and I want to exhibit personal courage for the benefit of many. So there's this idea that God didn't just do things in our life so that we could sit around. Our job in this world is to be dynamic and powerful for the benefit of the world. A little bit about Christianity in a nutshell. This is the 45-second narrative. The idea is that God's a father. So the Christian God is this concept of a loving father, right? And he originally created this world so that he could have a relationship with us. But what ended up happening is that because the world got corrupted through mistakes that were made, our ability to interface with this God was actually separated. What God did in response was, as part of a divine rescue mission, he sent his son Jesus to die for us so that we could rebuild this relationship. And believing in Jesus Christ is the thing that reconnects us with God in the Christian worldview. All of this stuff is talked about in the Christian Bible, and this just made sense to me. You're welcome to come up with your own conclusions. I want to share a little bit about my personal life. The year 2020 and the year 2021 was an outstandingly difficult time for me. A lot of things that I really wanted for years, and doors closing, also health problems that seemed mysterious and without cure. So literally spending hundreds of dollars on medical bills, trying to find solutions, and just getting more and more confused. This is a song that I use to keep myself encouraged. And it reads, "In the morning when I rise, as I open up my eyes, I can feel your mercy shining down on me." The Christian God isn't a theoretical God. It's someone that I interface with on a daily basis, and his presence gives me the courage to go live my life in a powerful way. And before this day rolls on, you can have my heart, my song. I don't want to leave unless you go with me. God gives me courage. I love you, and I want to love you more than the day before. On my best of worst of days, I never know what I will face. I believe that you will make a way for me. Regardless of my personal failures, my health problems, my faith in the Christian God allows me to go face tomorrow with courage. When I'm strong or when I'm weak, in my heart's a desperate need for you to take me by the hand and walk with me. I love you and I want to love you more than the day before. So to sort of recap, it's the things that happened in my life through Christianity is I moved from theory to relationship. And this is something that has positively benefited me. So now that we've heard a little bit of our panelists, what I really want to do is something different. We have a lot of Q&A. We will have some time for that. But I want to have 2 minutes for what we call a time of receiving. And so what this is we're all going to turn our videos off, mute ourselves. And really what I want you to do is to take 2 minutes and just say a simple prayer to either the universe or whatever God or whatever concept, or even just some sort of question of, is there something more out there? And you may have some emotions, you may have an impression, you may have an image in your mind, but I'd like to just take 2 minutes for us to say a simple prayer, and I want you to pay attention to your emotions. All right, so we'll get started on 3, 2, 1. All right. So whatever thoughts, emotions, feelings, yeah, if we can all come back together now. Yeah, I think that those are important. It's basically the innermost part of your being. What is it saying? So with that, please remember about what you heard, if anything, and we'll turn it over to traditional Q&A. So love to answer any questions or see if we can help and provide value for you. Or if there are no questions, if anyone would be interested in sharing if they felt anything at all. Or we can eat lunch.
I saw some really nice comments in the chat, so I'm sure people definitely felt.
Okay, well, awesome. Y'all, if there's no additional questions, feel free to drop. There is a question. Okay. Jacob, where is this question? We want to We want to see the question. Oh, Q&A. I wasn't doing this right. Thank you.
Oops. Yeah.
Austin, thanks for asking something. What has it been like sharing your journey with your families or loved ones? Austin, is this question for the group, the panel, or is it for one of us in particular?
I think it's probably for anyone who feels called to it.
Anyone? Okay. Anyone want to take that from the panel? I'm happy to if y'all don't want to.
I mean, it's a good question, sharing your journey with your families or loved ones. I'm fortunate to have a partner who that's one area that we really connect on is kind of our spirituality. So that's beautiful. With my family, I'm fortunate to have, like my mom is pretty understanding. We did grow up. I grew up more like in organized religion and Catholic. And went to parochial schools my whole life. But my mom is she's always just been very understanding. So I'm very fortunate to have a family that's been open and kind of willing to let me follow my own path.
Yeah, I can chime in there. I'm also very benefited to have really, really wonderful family. And so a little bit about my story. High school was actually a really difficult time for me. And there was a lot of family problems that we had. And to be fully transparent, I take responsibility for that. I actually think that I was responsible for a lot of the dysfunction in my family growing up. And in Christianity, there's a concept of forgiveness. And so basically what ended up happening is I basically asked them for forgiveness. And that was the first thing among many that really set in motion for us to heal as a group. And so my parents are my best friends now. And I think that my religious path helped me out with that, especially forgiveness. All right. Thank you for asking that, Austin. We have another question. Where has going on your respective spiritual journeys added value to your working life? Life isn't all about work, I know, but interested. Anyone from the panel want to take that one? We have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, I can take that. So thanks for that question. So, I mean, my belief is that like when you go into the spirituality, there are various aspects attached to it, which are really good for the new age day like work environment where um let's say if you're working with too much technology, I always try to have a synonym with or analogy with the way computer has been made. Like it has been made by many engineers, many people, and there's only one person who's working on the other side. So you need a bit of rest, which even computers need. So I think when going into the spiritual aspect, there are certain things which of course sometimes it's not describable to make it very tangible, but you have that kind of a raw feeling which helps you to get back to work. So like for me, if I'm working like 9 hours really really hard, if I take a break and go into meditation and go into a bit of a zone where I can do my spirituality, I think it helps me to come back and do more work, if it if it makes sense in that way. So I'm not able to describe what it feels like, but it definitely helps you to bring kind of a springboard to make things happen.
Thank you, Kalyan. And everyone, it's 11:30, so thank you for your time. Yeah, thanks for coming today. Hope that this sparks some great conversation. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.